There are times that we get it completely wrong. It's a very interesting and important subject. And you're right, there's a fundamental difference between these long-range seasonal timescale forecasts versus the day-to-day weather forecasts out of the week.
Just like Shannon says, the lived experience cannot be predicted based on these seasonal outlooks at all.
Just having been in this for the last several years and the pressure to produce a news story based on some of those outlooks, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. So I've become a bit of a skeptic. How do you get people on board just to be on the same page and care about taking care of the planet again if they say, well, you didn't get this forecast. It was not a wetter than normal winter last year, and we were way short.
And that's tough information to get across and a challenge for you to distill down in 15 seconds or less on an evening broadcast.
Well, hi there, everybody. I'm KOMO Meteorologist Shannon O'Donnell, along with...
I'm meteorologist George Waldenberger. I do the mornings.
That's right, and I do the evenings. And we are just starting this new weather segment here at KOMO just to talk a little bit longer about weather. We have 2.5, 3 minutes generally within our special shows in the morning or the evening to try to get in as much as we can. And we like to talk a little bit longer about the weather. There certainly are numerous topics that we can dive into. So we just wanted to start doing that in this medium here and host special guests like Nick Bond, who is a dear friend of mine. And Nick, tell us about yourself and your history as the Washington State climatologist.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm flattered to be invited to be a guest here. I was the Washington State climatologist from 2010 through 2024. Now they gave me a title of Emeritus State Climatologist, and I'm still working with the Climate Office and have been just interested and more obsessed with the weather and climate of the Pacific Northwest for my entire career. So what I'm doing here is a labor of love.
And so you're still working in climate even though you are semi-retired?
Correct.
Okay, wonderful. And I do have some history with Nick because he was my instructor many moons ago at the University of Washington in the Synoptic Lab back in the 90s. So you did that for a long time as well.
That's right. It was a class, a weather analysis and forecasting class. And as Shannon mentioned, it was a lab in which the students made forecasts every day. And part of their grade depended on how well their forecasts turned out. I'm pleased to report Shannon was near the top of the class in that regard. And
no surprises there.
Yeah. And, and so that's great. I also hired her for a special research project where on her own, I wasn't even along, she launched weather balloons from a research ship in the tropical Pacific for more than a month. Yep. And collected some invaluable data. And so... Right. We have that passed.
Right, which, instructor, short-time boss. And actually this leads nicely and delves nicely into the topic at hand because what I was doing out there on that NOAA research ship in the 90s was launching the radiosondes, the weather balloons, so they could go up and collect data, presumably, that would be fed into the models that we now use today. And that is very much the topic that we invited you here to speak about. Because, we are given these outlooks, often these seasonal outlooks, you've probably heard of them. They're the 3-month outlooks from NOAA. You'll hear about La Nina or El Nino coming up. You'll hear about the hurricane forecast for the season at hand. And just having been in this for the last several years and the pressure to produce a news story based on some of those outlooks, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. So I've become a bit of a skeptic. George, I feel, is kind of moderate on this.
Yes.
And Nick, this is very much your lane where you have a lot to say about how useful and viable these climate models can be, short-term or long-term.
Yeah, it's a very interesting and important subject. And you're right, there's a fundamental difference between these long-range seasonal timescale forecasts versus the day-to-day weather forecasts out of the week. We're really good at those day-to-day weather forecasts, and we're, don't have nearly the same sort of skill on those longer range forecasts. And there are some real inherent limitations to that skill. there are times that we get it completely wrong. And there are other times that do pretty well. And so the whole trick there is to try to figure out when we have a lot to go on and when we have to kind of throw up our hands and say, sorry, there's just not much here. It's feel free to roll the dice. We can't help you out.
Okay.
All right. So what I'm thinking, what Shannon and I do on a day-to-day basis, we forecast when it's going to rain in 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. Can you give us more of an example of how a long-range forecast may look, may sound, what it may be presented as? Yeah. As, it's let out to the public?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a fundamental difference in the type of forecast also. We certainly can't say anything about the timing or details in particular events. And so all we can give is broad perspectives on the probability of it being on the cool side, on the warm side, or more or less near normal temperatures, let's say.
And we'd be talking about over the course of the entire season.
Yeah, over the course of the entire season. So you can't plan your wedding, outdoor wedding on that basis. But potentially, especially if these forecasts have some skill, they can be used by utilities, farmers, all sorts of different stakeholders to good utility. And so if we did have great forecasts on the long range, that'd be really, really nice. The trick there is improving their skill.
All right. So for a farmer, say, looking at the summer outlook, and if it looks drier than normal, you can already start making plans for if you need to irrigate more and getting everything ready for it, as long as we know that forecast is accurate.
Exactly. And the key there is in a lot of these situations, you need a lot of lead time. It doesn't help if you know it's going to be a dry summer in May. You really need to know earlier in the year if you're planting which crops or whether to have fields go fallow, let's say, and so forth. And so that's a tall order, but there are at least times that we've done pretty well, and there's some prospects that those forecasts will improve in terms of their skill.
So just to explain some of my skepticism, even recently, and just to say I love short-range forecasts. I am always so incredibly impressed by, especially having done this for 30 years, mostly in this region. I mean, in the last couple of years, we've had storms come in where, especially if we've got some convection and the structure is almost identical to the model. When it comes in and you see it in real time, boy, the model picked that up beautifully 48 hours before, and it's coming, and it just blows my mind that we can do that now, because you couldn't do that in the 90s, when we knew each other. The modeling is so good. The timing and the structure can be beautiful for short-range forecasts, and we've made huge strides in that. But the longer-range seasonal forecast that I've become a bit of a naysayer with personally, say, for example, last fall, the winter outlook for last winter came out, and because we did have the weak La Nina, this is just one example, it was trending wetter and cooler than normal as a whole for the Northwest. Right. And as we know, we ended up in a drought by quite a bit. The snowpack was low. Yeah. And so you're trying to give people the story, and then not only does it not even come, back to what would be considered average to normal, it's far below. So it was a really off forecast. And the other point is, even if it was right, it's such a different. I see the long range benefits for farmers and for the energy industry, certainly, but for just the regular KOMO viewer, say it was right last year. This is recent, and so the modeling's as good as it is, but it was still, it was a miss. And so say it was wetter than normal. That can be a very different lived human experience. It could be we had 6-7 atmospheric rivers with a lot of sunny days in between, or it could have been just the big dark where we get the water torture drizzle for months on end where you don't see the light and you're praying for a sun break,
Right.
black hole sun style.
Right.
So it can be even if it's right and you are wetter than normal, those are very different experiences over 3 to 4 months. So what do you say to that?
Well, yeah, it kind of depends what your interests are and, what you might be using those forecasts for. I know in the Pacific Northwest, the climate office used to get plenty of queries about, should I get a ski pass this summer? Oh, not in summer, this winter coming up. And we'd generally say, suit yourself, sort of thing.
We're not there yet.
And but that's an example, and I'm sure there are others out there, home gardeners and so forth. But you're spot on that in terms of forecasts that can be used to change one's behavior, there is a fundamental difference between something, a strong storm coming in the next couple of days versus something that is by its nature just going to be more vague and nebulous out in, future weeks. And so that's just the nature of the beast.
So it's safe to say that when you're doing a long-range forecast, especially a seasonal outlook, you're not forecasting extreme events. You're not going down to specific dates. You're not looking at exactly where a storm will hit. And when I say that, I mean, for instance, hurricanes.
Yeah.
The seasonal outlook says nothing about which areas will get a landfall. It says nothing about how strong any of the hurricanes will be at landfall. And it doesn't really say about... one other problem with that is you could have an active storm season, but you're in Florida and you get missed by every one of these storms. So just like Shannon says, the lived experience cannot be predicted based on these seasonal outlooks at all.
Right. Now, to an extent, some of the things that you're talking about have some information on. I just attended a seminar at the University of Washington Atmospheric Science Department about using AI techniques to get an idea of how many extreme events are going to occur in a winter season ahead. And so nothing about the timing of them, but the potential for big blocking ridges that can deliver cold air to a particular part of the country, or to the frequency of windstorms. We know, for example, during La Nina, based on the historical observations, that we have more moderate windstorms during La Nina conditions. The really severe ones that are remembered by everybody, we can't say much about those, but the kind of nuisance storms, kind of like what we had last weekend, was... those do happen more often in La Nina. So we can't time them, but we could say, hey, you might want to tie up your dog, right?
Just fly away.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Past is prologue, and, what your office does on a grand scale is so similar. We're kind of a microcosm of that here in broadcast meteorology, or in my students when I teach them at the UW Dogcast. And the way we always go through a forecast is where have we been, where we are, and where are we going. So where we've been is the climate data. Where we are is currently what's happening today, and where we're going is very much the future cast in the modeling. Yeah. And like we've talked about, the short term has gotten so good, the long term is a little bit more nebulous. But I feel like the first piece of that puzzle is the climate data. And being here on the West Coast, we have a shorter time span to pick from and less data. We're not as data rich, certainly, as the East Coast, let alone Europe. So we are just getting a handle on what is considered normal, and the more decades that go by, the better that data set is.
Yeah, that's a really insightful comment. And there's a difference in kind of the number of realizations. That's kind of a fancy term. But we have a lot of days of weather to go back on and to kind of look at some of these relationships and so forth. We don't have that many individual winter seasons to go back on. And so that makes it a challenge in some of that, kind of from a training point of view. Just there's more weather data than there is climate data in that sense.
Okay. And the climate data is important because statistically we can go back and we can establish or draw parallels between when El Nino or La Nina was a certain way and then the resulting winter that followed. So as we stockpile more seasons, we'll have more of a data set to go to. But these long-range forecasts, they not only look at numerical models like we do when we forecast the rain into the future, but they're taking these statistical models and they're kind of blending them together. Is that right?
That's correct. The Climate Prediction Center uses both the climate models, the ones essentially that are used for the really long-term, climate forecasts out this century, to make out a few months to make the seasonal forecast, and then combine that with the statistics, like you said, what's happened during past El Ninos, past La Ninas, and so forth.
And other factors.
Other factors.
Madden-Julian oscillation, other oscillations in the atmosphere. Right. And they go down to levels like soil moisture, right? And they're taking in all sorts of considerations.
That's right. And what's on those seasonal forecasts, what really counts are what's called the boundary conditions, what sea surface temperatures are doing. As you mentioned, soil moisture conditions, maybe snow cover in Siberia and so forth. And that's the source of the predictability for these longer range predictions. For the out a few days, it's what is happening right now. We've gotten really good at getting a good handle on what the atmosphere is doing right in the present and marching forward over the next few days to see how it's going to evolve. But you lose that that kind of ability if you go too long into the future. The whole butterfly effect, where just the chaos and just randomness in the weather system just means it can go different directions. Just kind of like two leaves in a mountain stream, they can end up on different parts of the river, 100 feet downstream, even if they were close together at the start.
Which is the very nature of modeling, right? And we saw that happen. I felt so for the COVID modelers, it felt very similar to what we do in our field because they were trying to keep on top of it and lives were literally at stake and they were trying to make all these predictions and they had all these shifting parts coming in, knowing more and more about it like we do about climate, and that would change the outcome, right? How it was spread, how the outcome was going to look in the future.
Yeah, and so with each time iteration, you can have a little bit more error, and that error can grow with time, sometimes exponentially. But it doesn't necessarily always just translate to going longer equals more error either, does it? So if I'm looking out 3, 4, 5 months, I don't just assume 9, 10, 11 months will bring me more error. Correct?
Yeah, and there are times in which the system is more predictable and other times when it's less predictable. And so that is, and that's tough information to get across and a challenge for you to, distill down in 15 seconds or less on an evening broadcast. Right, just that, sorry, this time we don't have a lot to go on, and other times we can go, hey, there's a really good chance it's going to be warm and dry in the season ahead, let's say.
Speaking of that, we talk about how so much of our planet, all of the elements are intertwined, whether it's the soil, moisture, the sea surface temperatures, the ocean and the atmosphere are very much cousins. And you have a lot of experience with that, of course, kind of famously so around here for coining the term the blob. So tell us a little bit about the blob and how that evolved, and then the heat and the dry weather that followed up as a result.
Well, with regards to the blob, I had to dig deep into my vocabulary to come up with that. And I've been teased, and properly so, that my legacy is going to be a 4-letter word. So that's cool. But what I noticed in the winter of 2013-14 was we were in a really unusual weather pattern that was we weren't getting much action around here at all, and there was a lot of cold air going into the eastern North America. And meanwhile, the sea surface temperatures off our coast weren't cooling off as much as they usually do during the winter. They have a seasonal cycle. It's warmer at the end of summer, cooler at the end of winter. And in describing that to my colleagues, I just it's kind of an amorphous mass of water that was kind of moving around. I just referred to it as a blob.
Mm-hmm.
The term caught on
As
without
these
any
things do.
planning. And, I wish I could really take credit for it, but again, it just kind of happened. That being said, it did galvanize quite a bit of important work on what those events, now termed marine heat waves, what they do to both the marine ecosystem and in turn also what they can do to temperatures over land.
Mm-hmm.
And we've noticed that especially when it's warmer than normal waters along our coast,
Mm-hmm.
that in the coastal regions up and a little past the crest of the Cascades, it tends to be warmer than normal.
Mm-hmm.
Makes perfect sense. Our prevailing winds are from the west, and so that the atmosphere picks up a little extra heat and moisture, humidity, if the water's warmer. What is kind of interesting is that we don't see the impacts of those ocean temperatures, at least regionally, on precipitation so much.
But it's more temperature.
It's
so
more temperature.
The blob, you noticed 2013, it kind of grew into the 20 teens
Yeah.
as that growing blob of warm sea surface temperatures out in the Pacific. And then we had the terrible heat wave of 2021, where at least in our climate history here, which again is newer, we had never measured heat to that extent here in Western Washington. It was June of 2021,
Right.
and we came up to 108, which had been thought of as nearly impossible around here. Do you feel that the two were connected?
The original blob that really got it going in 2014 lasted a few years, kind of moderated, and there have been some additional marine heat waves out there, but I don't think we can really blame the sea surface temperatures for our huge heat wave of 2021. That was a spectacular event, as you mentioned, and to an extent, it was probably in a secondary way related to the overall warming of the North Pacific, but it wasn't. A primary factor wasn't the ocean temperatures right near the Pacific Northwest coast. I will, going back, though, to the original blob, that winter of 2014-15, when the blob was at its peak, was the warmest one we've had in the Pacific Northwest. Terrible
Skiing.
snowpack. We had
Terrible.
virtually no snow at the end of winter, except for at the very highest elevations, and huge problems for all sorts of sectors the following summer. And so the ocean temperatures can wreak havoc, but I don't think we can really finger them for the 2021 heat wave.
It's hard to draw all these conclusions.
Yeah.
We're so in the infancy stages of learning more and more about our climate and how all of these factors, you're right, the two leaves going in separate directions and what the outcomes will be. And George, your background is so focused because of where you were in Orlando on Atlantic sea surface temperatures
Right.
in the hurricane season. And so you saw that play out over a decade as well.
So I guess one of the next steps is to make sure these blobs can be factored into the seasonal outlooks, right? And to what degree are they, and what is the future of them being coupled in properly?
Yeah, certainly the models that are used, not the only part of the information, but the models that are a large part of the information used for these seasonal forecasts take into account what's happening in the ocean as well as in the atmosphere. And so in principle, and I have that qualifier, they can take into account what the ocean is doing in their forecasts. Whether they necessarily get those connections exactly right is something we're trying to improve. There have been, with the exception of this past hurricane season, the last few years have been relatively active in the Atlantic, and that's in part because the ocean has been on the warm side there. And so this was just a year in which we didn't have a lot of storms.
Yeah, and so when you run the oceanic model and then you use that to kickstart your long-range model, your climate model, then you have two sources of error as opposed to just one.
Yeah.
And so it's not a reason to be, I'm not as much of a naysayer as you, Shannon, because we talked about this, because in order to get there, we have to move through the less accurate phase before we can, get better at our forecast. So I feel like we're still moving in the right direction toward better medium and longer range forecasts. But where do you see us going after this? So what are some of the short-term gains we might make in longer range forecasts?
Yeah, certainly it's a cliche, but there are AI techniques being used for that purpose now and showing some promise. They're not going to revolutionize necessarily the forecast, and there's always going to be this inherent lack of predictability. Just the climate system is so chaotic and so forth. We're never going to have the sort of skill that we have out the next few days that Shannon is celebrating, properly so. And so there are some real limitations there. But there is a lot of interest in the climate community to try to get better with these because of their importance. And I think it's an exciting time for the climate community because of the prospects of improvements. Moreover, I would say that by trying to make better seasonal forecasts and learning from our mistakes, we can get insights into the real long-range projections for later this century and so forth. Some of the same tools are being used, and to kind of see where we get things right and where get them wrong. Can perhaps go a long ways toward improving our climate model forecast for the distant future.
Right.
So can we be right for the wrong reason? And then can that be very misleading? In other words, we forecasted a very snowy winter, but we weren't hitting the nail on the head as to why.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. And that, sometimes I hit a straight golf shot. And that's not any skill.
With a crazy swing, yeah.
Yeah, you're just fool luck. And so it is... that's a great point, is that just a better understanding of how the system works and the connections between the various parts of it. We still have a lot to learn, and especially have to figure out how to implement some improvements. So, we eventually can say things, at least with the more reliability, if not the kind of certainty we can.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I am a bit of a skeptic just in the now. I hate putting these out as gospel and making people think they can count on them. I think it's really important, and I speak about this with my dogcast students too, to communicate uncertainty. And if you have really strong signals like we did with the blob, or we do in hurricane season, and the Gulf temperatures and the Atlantic temperatures are just off the charts, something's up. When things are kind of muddy and you've got kind of a weak La Nina or a weak El Nino signal, it seems to be a weaker output, less certain. So it's important to get that across, and that's what's hard to get across in 2.5 to 3 minutes, right?
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. And when you use ensembles, when you have different models, a large number of model predictions, and there's a lot of spread, to make sure you convey that there was a lot of spread and everything wasn't focused in one small area. So there is a little less certainty to these forecasts.
Yeah, and there's been some work that has shown that the public in general, they certainly don't like, and they basically don't fully understand probabilistic forecasts. They want, well, just tell me what's going to happen. Well, sorry. All we can do is say it's more likely than not it's going to be, this side of, in terms of the temperatures. Cool. Yeah, and so forth. And so there, it's going to be a long haul, and we're depending on folks like yourselves to get the public used to this idea, and because that's the way it has to go.
And I think, to your point, we aren't going to get better if we don't keep trying. I absolutely respect that. And you're going to have, there's going to be some trial and error, just like there was with short-term forecasting, which I love. We've made such great strides, and I think we can all agree on that. That being said, with how wishy-washy or nebulous that the mid-range forecast can be, the 2 to 3 months. How do you get people, as a society and a civilization, we're trying to get people on board with caring for the climate. And I feel like politics is, on election day here, by the way, the day we're shooting this, it just happens to be. How do you get people on board just to be on the same page and care about taking care of the planet again? If they say, well, you didn't get this forecast, it was not a wetter than normal winter last year, and we were way short. How are you trying to convince me that the planet's going to be so different 100, 300 years from now? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would make the argument, let's say in winter temperature forecasts, that we get it more or less right 60% of the time, and it's not a great forecast 40% of the time. Those are just made up numbers, but if you have that kind of information, I would say that's fairly useful. Mm-hmm. And certainly if you were going to a casino and had a roulette wheel that you could win on 60% of the time, you could make some hay there. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that even if you there's not a great amount of skill, if you're more right than wrong, mm-hmm. you might as well kind of tell folks what the indications are, with all the caveats mm-hmm. that, hey, we can't guarantee this. This is just the way it's looking.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there will be a time when we can actually get a little bit more out of these for the day-to-day user? Maybe it does look probabilistic, but maybe we learn to grasp with that term a little better. And would it be something where if I was going on a cruise in 2 months and I had a probability of, running into a hurricane, and I could compare that with the average probability, are we going to get to a point where we can actually say, okay, I am a little more likely to hit a hurricane or to get rain or to have a heat wave during my vacation in 2 months?
Yeah. Well, to an extent, we're already there. But a key aspect there is just how much skill is there. If it's just a tiny amount, it's like, oh, get out of my face, mm-hmm. whatever. And depending on the decision, what skill level is necessary to actually change one's behavior. Mm-hmm. And it all kind of depends on the application. And so I would say on that 2-month cruise, chances are there's not a lot to go on there. Mm-hmm. But for other things, maybe, there is something, a utility planning there, power purchases and, sales and so forth. Maybe there would be something that they could use.
So probably something where someone has skin in the game for a long period of time. That way you can use this data a little bit more, I guess, responsibly.
Yeah. And to kind of deal with those times in which we get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And again, using the casino analogy there, if you can make enough bets and, you're going to win more than half the time, in the long run, you'll do okay.
Okay, and another way to look at this, if you're making a 3-month prediction and I want to stick my toe in one of those days in the middle, I'm probably not going to get an accurate representation of those 3 months, whereas if I'm there for the entire 3 months, I'll have a better chance of actually realizing what the wetter than normal, if it materialized, season meant to me as a farmer or as a power supply company.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have every expectation that just like what I have seen come to fruition with short-term modeling and how even in 30 years, how rapidly things have progressed, how accurate. I mean, we've had some of these snowstorms where you can get people home by this time because it's going to start and you're not going to get out when it's that much of a sure thing. Yeah. And it's been amazing to see the progress on short-term forecasting. So I have every hope that I will not be a naysayer in 10, 20 years' time and we'll have made a lot of progress from the practice makes perfect. And keep trying.
It's important to realize that we won't get better unless we make forecasts and learn from them. When I was a much younger fellow with more hair or darker color and all that sort of thing, I saw a talk by the then director of the Climate Prediction Center who admitted, we don't do very well at all on these seasonal forecasts, but we know we're not going to get any better unless we keep doing it and seeing where we can improve. Yeah. And so here's for continuing that effort and with some prospects for some improvements.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for speaking so in depth with us today about climate and long-range forecasts.
No, it's
really appreciate
obviously something I care very deeply about, and it's gratifying to have a chance to have a discussion with some folks who have clearly done their homework.
Well, good.
Well, thank you very much,
you.
and I enjoyed meeting you as well. Short-range, long-range forecasts are a little bit of a different beast, but it's nice to, I guess, learn a little bit and work with both of them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And great. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.